Welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, Hanging Out with the Guy series. Hi, I'm Justin, the guy. So today we're going to go over a series of what to look for when you're looking for a used bike. I have a top 20 list out there that kind of goes through each kind of bullet point. Going to make a video on each one of them. If you want to see more of them, subscribe or like my Facebook page or subscribe to YouTube, or also go to my website and you can join on to the newsletter through your email. So whichever way works for you, if you want to keep in tune and don't miss out. So today's installment is number 3 on the list, which is brakes. Brakes are very important, obviously. I mean, you want to stop when you're going too fast or whatever, it's like one of those things you kind of have to have when you're riding a bike, unless you're on a fixie and you're using your legs, which that's a whole different story. But anyway, with road bikes specifically, and this is what I go over is on road bikes, and refurbishing points. And when you're looking at a bike, and obviously you may not have a stand when you're actually looking at it in the field, looking at somebody's bike to buy. But we talked about the rims and rim surfaces, but today I want to cover the actual brake calipers. Unfortunately, I don't do a lot in disc brakes, but disc brakes, I'll make a whole nother series when I get one in and I can show those particular ones. I'm talking about specifically just a caliper brake on road bikes today. The caliper brakes, when you look at them, first you want to do the obvious thing. See if they match. Are they the right ones? Does the brake pads and the cartridges match? That kind of thing. They may be different, which is fine, but that means they've been either replaced and so forth. You can't really see how much the wear of the brake pads is by just looking at it, without the wheel being in there. So I would take the wheel off. So if you're comfortable using a quick release, take the wheel off and inspect the brake pads inside there. And what you're looking for is basically there's these little lines, and those are your wear indicators. If those are all flushed down, like if those are missing, those pads need to be replaced. Pads for these are not usually too expensive, and most of the time they're a cartridge system, so you just need to get the little cartridge and use this little Allen wrench here to back that out, and then they slide right out. Super easy to do, and I'll just do one here. But yeah, that's one of the things you want to inspect, just a wear thing, mainly. But there's other things we're going to talk about going over, and that just slides right out, and you can slide the new ones in. These do harden up over time, so that's another thing too. You might want to get a new set just to get a better brake performance. And that'll work really well. Or you can take a little bit of kind of like that sandpaper and scuff the glaze off of them, and that'll help with your brake performance. But obviously you don't want to take too much off. And you'll notice there'll be like little shiny things in there, which that's just null debris over a period of time of wearing those brakes down on the rim. So that's just the pad themselves. When you're actually inspecting the actual brake, you want to make sure all the bits are still on there. What I mean by that is, is there adjustment screw still in there, which I found a lot of those kind of pop out over time. Is the barrel adjustment compromised? Is there a lot of rust in that particular point? Do they flex, rebound well, which you can do that on the bike without attracting the brake, or you can use the brake lever itself to do the same thing. So the brake is basically, for easy way of mentioning it, it's like a muscle, right? In itself it flexes, but the nerve itself is the actual cable and housing. That's another thing to inspect as well. So you got the brake, and you want to make sure the brake itself is in a good condition, looks clean. Maybe it needs new pads, but that's something you can replace pretty easily. But the second thing is the cable itself. This what is the nerve that goes inside this housing. So what you're really looking for is this housing is compromised. If it's cracked, split, that nature, granted you won't be able to see inside there, but you'll see sometimes there's cable erosion or kind of material buildup from the housing, which inside that sleeve, so when it opens and slides back and forth, it's going to cause friction. Cables and housing are not too expensive to replace. relatively, but it's kind of tricky to do yourself. So, and there's other videos how to install cables and housing. Park Tools has an awesome series of doing any bike repair work. So I would check them out. But to replace this housing and piece, that sometimes will make a world of difference in your braking. So that might be something to consider when you're looking at the bike, and how if it seems rough when you're hitting the brake, that might be the cause of that. And lastly, it's the actual brake lever itself. And the brake levers are integrated most of the time with the shifter. So you want to kind of take a little peek in there. So if you open this up or take the wheel out, you can get this brake lever to open up a little more. Then you can take a look inside and see how much dirt and contaminants in there. If it's pretty clean, that's good. And that means I've been taking the bike pretty well. But if it's really gunked up and crusty inside there, that just draws that stuff in there. And bikes do get wet, which is fine, that's water, but water likes to draw into areas. So to clean that out, you can take a rag and spray some cleaner on there lightly, not directly into it, but on the rag itself. Then you can kind of wipe and dust out all those little contaminant areas. And also with brakes, you can take a little bit of, I like Tri-Flow. This is super lube, works pretty well. You can lube your pivot points in there. Also, this is good for the inside the housing itself. So if you had some housing and you needed to add some, you want to revitalize the housing, you can shoot a little bit of lube inside there, and that will help that cable glide once it's inside there to that brake a little bit better. This cable's been compromised, but it'll give you a little bit smoother, less friction. So those are the kinds of things you want to look at when you're looking at brakes. Cable routing is pretty serious. Also, on the frame itself, there will be these cable stops on the frame where the cable will stop into, or the housing will stop and the cable will extend through. You want to make sure these are clean. If they have the proper, it looks like this one actually. Oh yeah, it has a covering on there. That's the stop of the end of the housing, which you don't need inside the shifter because the shifter itself has that stop housing built into it. And just, make sure these are not compromised. If these things are compromised and they're like about ready to pop off, that means your frame's almost toast. There's not very many people out there that can fix a braze-on or a cable stop on a frame, because those are done at the manufacturing level. So it's one of those things you want to check when you're looking at the bike, because if those are compromised or boogered up or about ready to break, that's one thing. Also, there's bikes that have internal routing. Internal routing goes inside the frame. I was going to look for one that does have internal routing. Quick on hand. But the internal routing, if you're switching out the housing, that's a really tricky bit, because you want to put a sleeve in there so you can redirect that cable to go right back out. Because if you pull that cable out, to fish that thing through back in is almost virtually impossible sometimes. Even with the greatest mechanics out there, if that thing drops, oh boy, it's going to be a couple-hour ordeal trying to figure out how to get that thing to go through, using magnets and what have you, just to get that to go through the internal frame. Most bikes have external, but internal is something you want to look at and make sure those internal, the housing fasteners or the stops are not compromised either, because like in some of the internal bikes, that can get boogered up, so people messed with it trying to fix them and so forth, or they weren't assembled correctly, which I found on one client bike. It had been an installation or an assembly when it was new, and this thing was still like 15 or 16 years old, and several other mechanics have touched it, which kind of really baffles me why this backing was still popped out. And since it was popped out, enough pressure will force it in, which lengthens the cable, which makes the brake almost useless. So you go hit your brake and there's nothing there. So that's something you want to make sure those are cable ends are secure, feels good. Make sure these parts are not compromised on the brake caliper themselves. because if that snaps, you don't have brakes. So those kinds of things, it's all about safety. And I'm always, when I'm working on bikes, making sure that aspect is really, I'm always thinking about safety. Who's going to be riding this? Where are they going to be riding? I want those people to have the best experience possible and not dangerous experiences at all. So yeah, so that's pretty much a touch base on brakes and cables and housing and levers. I'll have some other video series that relate to other parts of the bike, some what I inspect, but that's a quick overview on the brakes themselves. And you can see I have a plethora of extra brakes that are takeoffs that are compromised, but I use them for spare parts to keep other ones keep going. But when we're talking about bad ones, like you're looking at rust, also there's different fittings. So also another thing to want to touch upon is when you buy a brake set and you're thinking like, oh, this will work on my bike, but it just mean I want to do an upgrade or whatever. On your bike itself, if you just bought a frame, you're going to have to do some testing and checking out. But where the back ends of these really fit, these are specifically sized for the bike frame you have. And those little bits have different sizes to them. So you may have to switch out one or two of these. But if you already have a set of brakes, you can just use the current ones. And whatever the brakes come with, if you're buying used, you don't need to use those. Or if they're the same size, it's fine. And also when I install them, I like to put a little bit of a bearing grease on these so it doesn't corrode and get stuck inside there. Also to lube these up, like I touched upon filing the pads, I like to put a little bit of a lube right on these two pivot points and also where the cable goes through. That just keeps all those contact points fresh, and that actually will bring back the life of the brake. Most of the parts I sonic clean, so I have to put lube back into those contact moving pivot points to kind of get those parts to work like they're supposed to. So that covers the brakes, and until next time, thanks for spending time with me, and again, subscribe if you like. Have a good one.